Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Emily Cash with the FreightWaves Media team, and I'm happy to present this webinar in partnership with Optym. Today, we will discuss and expel myths associated with automation while demonstrating the value AI can bring to the industry, emphasizing that AI enhances, not replaces, human decision-making. I'm happy to be joined by Shaman Ahuja, Deputy CEO at Optym, Chris Torrence, Chief Strategy Officer at Optym, and Scott Auslund, CEO of Gulf Relay. We will also have a live audience Q&A following the discussion, so make sure you have your questions ready for our presenters. Before we get started, I'd like to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to the help section or the audience chat function in your webinar console. If you have any questions that you would like to ask our presenters, please enter those to the Q&A box in your console, and we will answer as many of those as possible during the live audience Q&A following the discussion. We'll also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow in case you'd like to view it on demand or share it to colleagues. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris to kick off today's discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily, for having us. Thank you and the FreightWaves team. This is always a pleasure. I also want to give a shout out to the Optym marketing team for putting this on, as well as our hosts here in downtown Dallas at the top of the Bank of America Market Scale office here. So again, as you can see, Emily, as I was saying earlier, maybe ask Dooner if he's open to coming down sometime. Obviously, this view is killer. So so with me is Scott Auslund. Shaman obviously is in the meeting as well. And it's interesting. I get down to Dallas a bit. I'm in Chicago, and rare is it that we get to kind of hang out with the fellas. And last night, myself, Shaman, and Scott actually decided to kind of have a triple date of sorts to grab some tacos and go check out the Mission Impossible, the new Tom Cruise film. And the reason I bring that up is because if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but there's definitely a lot of AI components and part of the storyline. So I think that ties in well with kind of the conversation today. So yeah, hope to check out that movie. So yeah, before we get underway with the formal fireside discussion, I wanted to kind of turn it over to Shaman a little bit to give everyone who may not have heard of Optym or has less than a full understanding of what we do in the industry. I think Shaman can provide a little color and clarity to that. So Shaman, if you're able to kind of take over from here for a bit, and we'll get underway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And I very much enjoyed our three-way date yesterday. So thank you, Scott, for that. Thank you, Scott, for that recommendation.
I don't know who's going to take the motorcycle off the top of the Bank of America building, but we'll draw straws for
Tom
that
Cruise is coming over. We have a
Chris.
special guest here soon.
So for those of you that don't know, Optym was actually founded. We've been around for 20 years. Our headquarters are in Dallas. We have a small team, about 40 people in Dallas, and then another 200-ish in Bangalore. So we're a pretty decent-sized company. We've been around for 20 years, and it was actually founded by an MIT professor, Ravi Ahuja, who I like to call my dad. And what he was doing, he was actually teaching network optimization theory in OR departments. This is back before operations research was really a thing. So back then it was just supply chain logistics or supply chain management. And after teaching for 20 years, he realized that there's a big gap between what's really being taught in schools and what's being practiced in industry. So he decided to shift gears, become an entrepreneur, and take the theory that he was teaching and bridge that gap and try to bring some of that theory to application. And we started in the rail and mining space, where our first customer was CSX Transportation. At the time, we were in Gainesville, Florida, so CSX was based out of Jacksonville, our backyard, and we were doing some consulting work for them. And then after doing that for about, I would say, 10 years, along with random projects in shipping, airlines, trucking, we landed a major deal with Southwest Airlines, where they came to us to optimize their network. And that was really just a fancy way of saying choosing where to fly, when to fly, and how to optimally route the planes. They shopped around, they couldn't find a vendor to really address that problem. And at the time, they had a massive network of 3,500 flights a day, over 700 or 650 planes. So you can imagine it would be very difficult for anybody to do that in their heads. So that ended up leading to several more products and an entire division being formed. We actually ended up exiting that space. We sold that partner Amadeus. And then for the past, I would say 10 years, we've really been focused on trucking. And on trucking, we realized that there's lots of opportunities for optimization, predominantly for very large carriers. So our core forte as of today is really addressing three major problems. One is load consolidation. I have many shipments in many different pickup locations, going to many different destinations and many different drop-off locations. How do we optimally consolidate those loads to minimize the number of trailers? Once you have that load plan, you'll obviously need drivers to haul those loads, and you'll need to figure out which drivers should take which shipments, also considering those driver preferences of, is this driver home every night, every other night, every week, so on. So then after creating that load plan, we created a driver plan. And then we also had another very interesting and very complicated problem related to pickup and delivery, which is how do you take hundreds of, I would say, local deliveries, group them efficiently, and then create an optimal route amongst them. So if I was just looking at on a map and I had 5 stops, I could probably draw a line. But if it was 100 of them, obviously it would be much harder for me to figure out which lines to draw and where. So that's kind of those are the 3 main problems that we've solved to date. And what we've learned by working primarily with LTL carriers is that humans are good at dealing with other people, and machines are great at crunching numbers. And if you want to arrive at an optimal or near optimal solution, you're going to need to evaluate millions, if not billions of options. And there's no way a human could do that. Now, don't get me wrong, some planners are like Rain Man, the way they process information and come up with a solution. But it takes years, if not decades, to get to that level. And right now, I think my generation at least does not have the patience to develop that skill set. So right now, we expect computers and apps to tell us what to do. I'm that way, and I know a lot of my friends are that way. So right now, it's very much leaning on technology to provide the decision support to make the best decision. Now, another thing that we've learned is that AI can't really work on autopilot. So as much as we want to create an easy button, it's just not feasible. So it really needs to be a man and machine and balance between AI work and human work. So right now we're entering into a new space in the truckloads sector where we're launching a product called Load AI, where the idea is really to keep dispatchers in control and give them the tools they need to make the best decisions. And the decisions at this point are, how do I optimally take the loads that I've committed to with my shippers or brokers and map them onto my assets, considering not only, I would say, pickup and drop off times, but also the needs of the drivers that are ultimately going to be hauling those loads. And right now it's a very, I would say, complicated process, and it's really done manually today. So decisions like, oh, I got this load, who's in the area, what's the rate, can it justify a large deadhead, will the load honor the driver's state preferences, will he run out of hours and I'll miss a delivery window. All of these things right now, a planner is just looking at likely 2 data grids, processing that information and coming up with a solution. So what we want to do is give them easy, intuitive tools to arrive not only at a feasible solution, but also an optimal one. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very much man-machine, but it's also very much a partnership between our team and a real-life carrier. We're a bunch of techies. The only way that we're really going to build something that works for the market is by partnering with a carrier. And I'm very fortunate to have partnered with Scott Auslund at Gulf Relay. Their office conveniently is only 8 minutes from the Optym office. So logistically, it works out, low deadhead. And with this, I will hand it over to Chris and Scott to just talk about Gulf Relay and some of the challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Shaman. And again, I want to reiterate, and I can't really emphasize enough that we've, in my days in the freight tech space, right? There's all kinds of approaches, lots of solutions. Very exciting time, as we can all relate to. So yeah, and optimization, again, very broad stroke. So what I really, and people ask me, you've joined Optym the last 2 months, give or take. What really brought you over? And I like to always reemphasize the fact that it's nice to see a vendor in our space that really understands that dynamic between the heavy amount of nuance, the tribal knowledge that our end users, our operators, driver managers, fleet managers, et cetera, those on the front lines, I can't stress this enough. We need you. Again, going back to my Mission Impossible movie last night, that may be kind of potential end games for better or worse, but I'm very bullish that AI, it's not going away. As Elon's of the world said, the genie's out of the bottle. Can't get it back in, and that's not a bad thing. There's a lot of good things that we can do in this industry that's starting to, as an emerging technology around AI and other autonomous augmentation type of approaches. But again, I think it's important to really make sure that those users that maybe even tuned in today understand that you're invaluable. And as a vendor, we really want to, Go Freely is a great example. I'll turn it over to Scott shortly. But this is a case in point of how we want to build our solution by operators and for operators. And I think that's really going to be a mantra that we continue to roll with. And as Shaman said, and I've said it before, if you follow me on LinkedIn, yes, I use a calculator every day. I don't know many of us that don't. But yeah, when's the last time you had an interesting conversation with a chatbot, right? So again, how do we combine the best of human to human interaction? Things that machines obviously to date, and I'm not sure how long it'll take before I enjoy, a chatbot conversation, but also realizing that AI can certainly augment and eliminate and alleviate some of the tasks and the burdens that will enable those end users to free up some time. And Scott, again, can't have a better guest on today that really, running a truckload operation can certainly empathize with some of the things that we're trying to accomplish. And again, it's the folks like Scott and many other folks throughout industry that are really going to pave the way for us as we develop products, which is an incremental process. And we really welcome the feedback. So for everyone listening today, please understand we need you. That's going to be the message I hope sticks with you. So with that, Scott, if you want to give a little background, and thanks for joining us today. Take
absolutely.
Glad time to be here today. Busy day,
yes.
Right? Fun time last night.
Absolutely, that was great.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about the latest and greatest over at Gulf Freeway.
Yeah, so I've enjoyed Gulf Freeway a lot. I've been there since 2018, and started out as an asset-based company. And the vision was really to try to say, how do we take a best-in-class asset company with a wonderful safety score and a great culture, and how do we add some additional capabilities to it to turn it into kind of a full-fledged 3PL, right? And so that's what we've done. So when I came in 2018, I joined as kind of our chief strategy officer. Spent a couple years getting the Dallas office stood up. So originally based in Clinton, Mississippi, which is just about 20 minutes outside of Jackson, Mississippi. Very strategic logistics location between Atlanta and Dallas, a lot of traffic there. And it was a great fit, great place for us to kind of grow up. Started the Dallas office and opened it in 2019, which is where most of the 3PL side of the business is. And then I kind of bounced back and forth, and I'm fortunate enough to have friends in both places. So right. Yeah, which has been great. But just right about 12 years here, about 230, 240 drivers,
yeah.
About 245 assets on the tractor side, probably about 650 trailers. And we're constantly looking for ways to take some of the cutting edge technology and put it in the hands of humans. Trucking is innately a human business, right?
Yes, it is.
And so at the end of the day, we have no autonomous trucks. I think autonomous trucks have a place, but I think they've got a long way to go. And so when we look at our current business and we say, how do we make sure that the drivers in our fleet get their best possible work-life balance, get the miles they want, get the home time they want, whatever that may be, while at the same time running an efficient business, because our customers are constantly asking us to provide more efficiency to them, right? And so I see Optym and tools like Optym as being at the core of kind of that new tech stack that allows us to blend the best of both worlds. So I'm personally really excited about that. I know Maddie and the rest of the team at Gulf is really excited about what this technology can do for us long term.
Absolutely. And so Scott, we kind of, again, I mentioned optimization tends to be a broad stroke, and a lot of folks tend to apply it to the broader ecosystem and supply chain. And in my experience, it's best off to kind of pick a place where you fit in. And I think that goes back to Optym. If you can provide significant value in the optimization world of the airline space, which we all know is complicated, the LTL, the rail world, the mining world, I think this load AI product, as Shaman mentioned, it's just this massive piece of pie in trucking is certainly ripe. And I think they're ready to start kind of adopting this type of technology. But again, as the recurring theme throughout this, and you said it best, how do we really get those users engaged, getting it to understand that it's there as a virtual assistant versus the threat of, I'm getting a pig slip, automation's taking over. And I think while that may be applicable in certain industries, I think, as you just stated, trucking is just, so nuanced, right? There's so many things that happen in the physical world that we just can't plan for. And let's be honest, again, machines aren't that good yet. You mentioned autonomous trucks, right? At some point, maybe down the road, who knows when the public trust is there and the regulatory issues have been dealt with, then it maybe becomes more of a math problem, right? But again, my personal stance, again, the human element is not going anywhere anytime soon. So I think we can probably agree with that, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Scott, when we talk about, optimization, or what are we optimizing for, right? That's kind of the first key step is, well, is it an objective function? We hear about, is it just autonomous, right? Moving A to B, or is it more of a objective in the sense I need to get this driver to these multiple locations, but for whatever reason, the driver needs to get some at home time. He has a family emergency, a wedding, things that happen and unfold in the real trucking world every day. When you talk about optimizing, I think that a big part of what Optym is trying to do is make sure that we really value the driver-centric approach, because I think you, of all people I've talked to in the industry, really have an appreciation for drivers. I know we all do, but throughout our conversations, you're constantly going, yeah, the KPIs are all important. There's absolutely profitability, revenue per asset, utilization, all that makes sense. But if we don't have drivers, we can just agree that full L5 and L4, L5, full autonomous trucks are a ways out. There's something there to be said to make sure that those drivers are also in the dispatcher, right, in conjunction, are really buying into what we're doing and really see it as a value add to their own life.
Right.
Doing more with less, right, which we'll talk about. So when you talk, I love that when I came over to your office, right, and you gave, Scott's always good. He's a whiteboard guy, and I love it because I'm a visual learner. He had this bullseye, which I think we have a little visual here we can look at. That really resonated with me because you are a practitioner, as you have been, and now you're the CEO of an asset-based company, right, which is a challenge in its own right.
Yes.
So, if you want to kind of give a little bit more, kind of provide a little more context to what you mean by when we talk about driver centricity optimization.
Yeah.
Can you shed a little more color on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. I think a lot of optimization problems, and Optym's not the first optimization engine we've looked at, right?
Sure.
We've looked at many different ones. I think the industry as a whole on the irregular route OTR trucking side has been chasing kind of this idea for a while. But a lot of the technology that I had seen so far, one of the biggest reasons it didn't work for us is it wasn't driver-centric, it was freight-centric. So the way the basic idea would be, and I'm not the MIT professor, right? Shaman's dad is, but ultimately the way the thought would be is we have all these puzzle pieces on a table, and we've got to put all those puzzle pieces together into a route. And then what we'll do is we'll take that route and give it to a driver. And they don't have any say in it. They don't have any, they're not part of the stakeholder. It's just, well, this is the ideal route, and so you're going to go run that. In reality, that's not how the world works, right? And so a driver is a remote employee, essentially, and they have their own career aspirations. They have their own home time. They have certain areas they like to drive, certain areas they don't. And oh, by the way, if you send your drivers on shifts or areas of the country they're not familiar with, your accident ratio goes up, right? So there's a vested value, even from just a safety standpoint, let alone a driver retention or anything like that. You're going to be safe for an area that you're comfortable, right? Some of us may be, eating hamburgers or doing things we shouldn't be doing in the car, right? But at the end of the day, if I'm in my neighborhood, I've got a pretty good idea of like where the potholes are and where the dog runs across the street. And so what I've seen with optimization is trucking has kind of taken this myopic approach to it sometimes and said, well, we're just going to optimize for that, and then the drivers will do whatever we need to do. Sure. In reality, I view it much more as almost more the opposite side, right? How do we take a driver-centric approach and say, you're paid by the mile, and so you get to determine your paycheck every week. If you want to be out for 3 weeks at a time, right? Like when I was at Covenant, we'd have teams that'd be gone for 3 weeks at a time and not see home, right? But they're running for a purpose. Maybe they had a savings goal or retirement goal or something like that, and they chose to do that. And our job was to give them freight to move that. At Gulf Relay, it's a very different model. Most of our drivers are pretty experienced. We tend to hire drivers that are on the maybe backside or ladder side of their career, and so they bring that experience to us. They've kind of figured out that balance, and so they kind of come to us and say, listen, this is sort of the check I want to make. These are the areas I want to drive. Maybe I don't want to drive in the middle of Chicago in the snow or whatever it may be, right? Yeah, you live there and you don't want to do it, let alone me, and then with 80,000 pounds, right? You couldn't get me to do that.
No way.
And so what we have loved about Optym is the opportunity to say, we're going to take all those driver feedback, everything that they're really looking for, and then we're going to optimize our network for that, right? And you still have customers, you still have needs that you need to meet. But when you start with the driver and sort of work forwards from that place, you get a much higher retention rate. And I think kind of what this picture shows, and every trucking company really, probably less than 500 trucks, has this type of idea, right? You have a tenured group of drivers, they're bought into the company, they've been here a long time, and they sort of get the freight that they're looking for, right? They're the older country club member who's been there for 20 years who gets the 7 a.m. tea time, right? It's just, that's what's going to happen. And then you go further out from that, and folks that have just joined the company, there may be less than 6 months involved. That's where it gets, they're going to get some regular freight, but we're still trying to figure out where they want to go, and we're still trying to figure out what customer freight matches them best. And then the outer ring is really your new drivers, right? These are your less than 6 months. These are people who just showed up to your company, went through orientation. They're trying to figure out the ropes. They're trying to get to know, what dispatcher is going to give them the best freight, how that's all going to work. And where I see Optym providing already opportunity for us is being able to look at those drivers and saying, we promised this person X amount of miles a month or a week, and that's their paycheck. And so if we're not meeting that for 2 weeks in a row, that driver's going to go look elsewhere, right? And there's a cost and an expense. Not to mention it's not the right answer, right? To churn people, right? We're here to try to build a company around that. So I think Optym's focus and the tools that they've developed that allow us to optimize for the driver side of things is an absolute game changer.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And again, I think that visual demonstration along with the way you explained it, I think it certainly resonated with me when I came over. So yeah, I think again in my experience, Scott, it's you have these executives, right, that are looking at the dashboards, and there's certain metrics, obviously, that whether it's appeasing shareholders and keep hitting budgets, et cetera. Again, major challenges. Vendors tend to, and I've been a part of these, right, where you go in and say, and we all agree, again, the human brain just can't comprehend the amount of permutations that take place on any given day. Not mine. And I would argue even the Ivy Leagues would say we still struggle with that sometimes. So I think that, again, it goes back, though, to you've got this idea of executives looking at a broader network, and I've seen optimization tools where, yeah, the decision that's made at a strategic level may be better for the network. And I think that there's merit to that. I absolutely do. I think it's good to take that 40,000-foot view of a network, and our industry, as you know, tends to operate in silos, whether it's by design or otherwise. But again, when you talk about, all right, executives are happy, we see these projected savings, we got to implement it, we got to deploy it, and ultimately we got to execute on that, right? And so, as I've often said, what I'll see is you sit down, and I used to be an operator, right? So that's those were the most valuable learnings probably ever for me, is sitting in the front lines in the trenches. But again, as it now I've moved into the vendor side of technology, and it's the reality sets in of if we're not really again going back and ingesting some of that feedback that for the frontline folks, we're really missing the opportunity for them to really get that to prove they're valued. And going back to drivers, it's that duality between the driver and the dispatcher. I love the idea that we're building software that really does ingest a lot of that information that they're giving us as we create product, versus trying to assume we have product market fit based on, obviously some of us have more experience than others, but these assumptions, these fallacies that we make, and then all of a sudden, to your point, as an industry, we're at what, 100% turnover any given year. That's incredible. People always say, how is any industry operating at 100% turnover? And again, if I kind of boil it down a little bit, a lot of that has to do with companies investing technology that just kind of miss the mark on getting that frontline feedback. And I think to your point, if you've got a driver that's basically, one of your loyal drivers, and an AI tells them, hey, this machine just said you're better off taking a completely different route that's unfamiliar. You said it, right? We love our comfort zones, and drivers are no different, right? We need to make sure that we really understand that. So again, it's that man and machine, as we've been discussing. How do we balance and harmonize that? So I think, again, it kind of leads into some questions we were asked. This is a broad kind of question here, and we can kind of maybe streamline a little bit. When you think of AI, right? And again, there's a lot of hand waving around AI. I said it again. I'll say it. I am bullish. If you don't believe in AI being arguably the biggest investment for the globe on so many levels, we're seeing that. Then you're probably missing the train a little bit. But how do you, when you kind of take it down into the trucking side of things, Scott, how do you kind of envision AI being a major asset and a value add to the goal for your operation, maybe speaking in trucking in general?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest benefits I see is that AI has the potential to allow us to be more human. And what I mean by that is one of the things that we do when we interview for planners and dispatchers at Gulf-related A is we have them do puzzles. We have them do brain teasers. Nice. Because we're not using optimization. We're using it with Optym now from an experiment and a pilot standpoint. But at the end of the day, we still have a lot of manual work that we do. And so that has been sort of the standard in the trucking industry. And I didn't invent that. That's pretty typical. If you go to a larger trucking company and you're going to be in a planner or dispatching role, they're going to ask you to do some sort of some sort of intellectual brain teaser type idea. Can you process information rapidly and form a pattern, right? What I would love to do is test dispatchers and planners off of emotional intelligence. Because if the system is going to do 70% of the planning and the lifting, right? well, then the other percentage of your time should be spent talking to those drivers, understanding what their needs are. How's your family doing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the whole part of, imagine being a remote employee where you might work for that company for 10 years and you may see those people like once or twice a month. You know what I mean? Completely. And we're not talking Zoom or anything. We're just like, you may talk verbally on the phone with them and then otherwise not see them. You know, that's
contact.
incredible.
Yeah.
No contact. So, you know, that is a really daunting company culture and emotional challenge, right? And so I would love for our team, they do a great job, let me be clear. But at the end of the day, their primary role and job right now is trying to take this freight map and turn it into something that's a profitable business, right?
Sure.
And if we had AI to help us do that to a large degree, what else could we do with that brain power that humans really are good at? To Shaman's point, right? Let the system crunch the numbers. Let us kind of add that other piece of it that's a human aspect.
Yeah,
I'd love to see.
And again, I said it before. I think that it's great to have these high-level discussions, but let's. I want to let Shaman, who's got our platform up, I think, to kind of give us a visual and some illustration of that, because otherwise we could talk AI all day.
Absolutely.
Well, let's see. I'm a big believer in the tangible product. So, Shaman, is there a means that you can kind of show us a little bit of kind of digest what Scott was saying and kind of show us in a more of the dev environment of the platform?
You bet. And just a kind of a footnote or a little preface to that. In my experience working with Southwest, as much as I would love to say that we made optimization work from day one, it really wasn't like that. It took, I would say, years or at least months leading up to it to really build the trust in the model. People aren't going to trust a machine to do their job for them day one. That 70% target that Scott mentioned, it's going to start off at maybe 5%. So our approach really is, let's start with getting them to feel comfortable that, hey, maybe the model's at least evaluating assignments correctly. So before we get into the decision making, how about decision support? What if this driver hauls this load? What if this driver hauls these 3 loads? Does it work as a unit for him, considering the deadhead, the arrival times, all of that? Once they get that trust in the model that the engine is scoring the assignments correctly, then they'll have more faith to actually have the model make the decision for them. So enough talk. With that, let me share my screen.
Yeah, while Shaman's pulling that up, I love the fact he talks on that trust, Scott. Again, I think that's our industry, right? If we don't have trust, what do we have? So vendors need to do a better job of
trying to be realistic, right? That's the other thing. I love that Shaman's talking about that 5% piece, right? I mean, it's important to be able to say, we have milestones, we're going to make progress on this, but man, this is a complex problem. We're not going to solve this day one.
No, I mean, and Optym's been for 20 some years trying to solve it, and it never really is. It never ends. Transportation is a continuum of sorts. So, great point. So, Shaman, I'll let you go ahead and dig in a little bit.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is our main dispatch screen, and a lot of you might be wondering where this information is coming from. So we have loads in the system, we have drivers in the system, we even have locations of the drivers in the system. And I know a lot of carriers, especially larger carriers, will have their own TMS, whether it's TruckMate, McLeod, Oracle, what have you. We're not trying to replace those TMSs. What we're trying to do is give you the tools that you can plug into those TMS for that optimization or decision support. So we'll basically source asset information. We have an open API. We'll source asset information. We'll source driver information. We'll source loads, and we'll source locations and hours of service so that we have everything that we need in order to make the decisions. Now, there might be some things like driver preferences that you may not be maintaining in your system. That's okay. For that, we have an ability to edit those directly within the system. So at the top, we have the drivers. This is kind of my continuum, as Chris likes to call it, of what's happening this week. What has happened so far, what has been assigned, and then what are the gaps that I need to fill with the unassigned trips that are at the bottom. So let me go to one of my favorite drivers here, John Wake. He's currently in Clinton, Mississippi. And let me see what he has up planned for this week. So as I see that he's got a time off scheduled for July 17th. So next week he needs to be in Boston. So I should definitely be mindful of that piece. regarding his preferences, let's see how many miles he wants to drive at where he's at right now. And let's see if he has any state preferences. So looking at this, he doesn't want to go to Indiana, Kansas, or Tennessee. All right, I will be mindful of that. And he's got the 78 work week. All right, everything is good there. So going to John Wick, what I would do is, let's say, click this little gap and say, okay, let's assign a trip. So I don't trust the model to make a recommendation or optimize for me. So let me pick the trip, but maybe I'll have the model tell me how good the trip is. So let's consider this trip to Huntsville, Alabama. The model runs, match rating of 1.5. That is not very good. He's going to be deadheading for almost 5 days. And there's going to be and he's going to miss his time off by almost 3 days. So that's definitely a bad choice. So won't do that. What about this pickup in Tennessee? Let's consider that. Again, match rating low. Deadhead is on the high side. And then we see that the state requirement we did not meet. So I could go down the list, but I'm starting to get the sense that, okay, the model might know what it's talking about. So at this rate, maybe I'll just cancel this manual assignment, and then I'll say, hey, why don't you recommend a trip for me? So load AI is crunching the numbers. And then here we see what it thinks with the Optimo is the recommended assignment, as well as a bunch of other options that might not be as good. So let me evaluate this just to see what we got. Match rating of 5 stars. I know that can't be bad. He gets sufficient pay, sufficient revenue for the company. No delays. I like it. Let's lock it and save it. And with that, we got the load assign, and I'm ready to move to my new guy. And I see that it's getting him into Massachusetts, hopefully in time for his vacation. And with that, I will pass it back to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Shaman. I appreciate you doing a little demo there. So I think that kind of really reinforces the point of it's just the human brain is only capable of comprehending so much. And a lot of that is, Scott would attest, probably your seasoned folks will know that. But we also know that there's turnover that happens even in the dispatch and operational role.
Absolutely.
So you think about the time and the investment of recruiting and scaling up that knowledge gap, right? There's a lot to go into that. So I think with AI, it's almost having like the substitute planner there that's up to speed in a fraction of the time it would take for one of your other operators to take time out of their day and try. How do you possibly teach years and years of just tribal knowledge, right, to someone new? You can't. So, and let's be honest, the business still goes on.
That's right.
So, when you think about it in that context, again, I look at the demonstration like Shaman just gave. Hey, I know that things are going to happen. We know that a good chunk of the freight, though, is, we say arguably 60, 70, 80% is static, and it's fairly minimal touch, right? But I think most operators would say, well, I spend 100% of my time focused on those 20%-ish exceptions management. And I think that we can automate a lot of that lift, that they're still doing a lot of manual keystroking to instantly provide options for those folks, whether it's, again, on the stuff that's a little more static, but really more importantly, when they're in a pinch and they've got to immediately, how do we intervene and reconcile when things happen, leveraging the machines to go, show me my options, right? And then I'll take the baton and make that decision for myself. So Shaman, it is, again, it's that assisted mentality versus that we're taking over automation, which I think definitely strikes fear in myself and probably many others. Kind of ties into the next question I would ask, Scott, when you talk about challenges. Now, this is a loaded question, right?
How long do we have?
Yeah. But when you think about, we'll try, when you talk about current challenges as a carrier, right? We know the market dynamics are always in play. I think everybody, the feast from 2021 has started to kind of, the famine seasons picked up. Even FreightWaves, right? We're kind of everyone's speculating without a crystal ball. Are we hit the bottom? Are we close to the bottom?
Right.
But again, all those things are, as a CEO of a trucking company, you're constantly having to evaluate. And then also, based on what reality is today, you talk about 6, 12, I don't know, I don't have the crystal ball, but when the market inevitably does flip, are you prepared and have the tech stack in place to kind of support what many folks were the wake-up call during the COVID era of, oh my, are we really positioned well to be able to handle the influx of freight? And then inversely right now, like you're seeing, how do we kind of adapt on the fly when the market shifts in a downward direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the difficulty of dealing in trucking is, you don't set the price for the market, right? I mean, that's just the nature. And we're not the only industry that's like that, but certainly that governs it, right? So the market really sets the price. And so you're constantly focused on cost optimization And really, when you look at a P&L on a trucking side, and this is why I don't believe AI is going to eliminate a tremendous amount of jobs in the trucking space, right? Because when you look at the P&L, my fixed costs are, probably 25% versus my variable cost, right? So that variable cost of fuel and driver pay and insurance and all that stuff, that's AI can't get rid of that, right? And so at the end of the day, when you look at these tools, they're really about taking our existing staff and making them more productive and allowing us to add trucks to the fleet, rather than saying, oh, there's an opportunity 3 years from now where we can, just have AI route everything. Like, that's not realistic, right? And no one should be pursuing that, because from a financial standpoint, it doesn't even make sense, right? For us, we want to continue to grow our fleet. We know that we can add a significant more trucks to our fleet without having to add a significant amount of overhead. And that's not just from Optym side, that's from a lot of different tech vendors that we're using. Our focus over the next 3 years is to grow the fleet, sustainably over time. But our goal is always try to cover that fixed cost with as much revenue as we possibly can. That's not based on variable.
Yeah, I like that you said that, because you're right. I think the assumption is that it's you say do more with less. The assumption is reduce FTE headcount, right?
That doesn't mean that.
It doesn't mean that, right? It's about maximizing that, right? And the talent, and again, with the talent gap, why would you ever want to get part ways with those folks that really support the business?
Makes no sense.
Again, AI is there as a complementary set of tools. So I think that really helps. Scott, we want to ask you, again, we kind of touched on the challenges. It's that adaptation, right? How do you adapt to these changes? And it's happening faster than ever, right? Technology that, we were, as a product of the 70s and grew up around we were probably that generation that was really getting introduced to the technology to some extent, at least what we know it as today. And it just keeps, the pace at which it's evolving is incredible. So when you talk about adapting to the changes, how do you envision, what are some best practices maybe you envision in that regard?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to remember that operators are not product people, right? And you can't expect to be. And so,
nor are we operators to some extent, right? Just on the driver's side.
Absolutely. But, I think one of the things I've appreciated about Optym, and especially Shaman and his team, they went to Clinton, Mississippi and spent multiple days sitting on the floor with our team, right? And that is so critical, because what I've found is, we also develop some of our own in-house tech software at Gulf Relay and on a minimal scale. But what I've learned in that small space is operators need to be asked questions. You have to sit and map out their processes. And before you put any line of code in, you have to show them and say, does this accurately represent your day-to-day now? And that is so critical and important. And I've been thrilled that the Optym team has been willing to do that. But that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to realize it's going to take time, right? None of this is going to turn on a dime. You can't turn an ocean liner in a bathtub. You got to be committed culturally to changing, and then you got to be committed to taking the baby steps that it takes, so that you eventually will get there. I think Bill Gates was the guy that said that most people overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what they accomplish in 10 years.
Sure.
And when you look at a big change like this, that's a multi-year change, and you just got to be prepared to do that as an organization.
Yeah, I think we wanted to talk again about we talk about the freight recession, almost kind of broken record at this point. So I'm optimistic things are going to change. When you talk about that doing more with less, I think you already kind of touched on it. And it may be good for Shaman. Let's just get into a real world scenario. How does systematically, when those changes happen, we talk about the resilient supply chain. There's some buzz around that ability to adapt and recover, right? So Shaman, maybe there's a use case you can kind of give us to kind of demonstrate that a little more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start sharing my screen again. You should be seeing it now. So right now, my Gantt is a little bit busy I got 50 drivers and almost 600 trips that I'm looking at. So let me go ahead and then filter it to just the drivers that I manage. And then let's say I found out that Mad Max is supposed to haul this load from Ocala. Yeah. To haul this load from Ocala to McGee, and turns out he's sick. So he's sick, he can't take this load anymore. Very common real world disruption, truck breaks down, driver falls sick, what have you. So what I will do is I will go ahead and then revert to available, basically unassign this load. And then now I gotta find the right driver to haul this load. So let me find that trip again. Here we are. So I could choose a driver myself, or I could go ahead and hit recommend driver. Crunching the numbers, obviously it says Mad Max is the best choice, but we know Mad Max can't take it. So we see that there's another option for Frank Martin to take it as well. So I'll say, okay, I'm good with Frank. He's free. And then again, I can see what that match rating looks like, maybe a little bit higher deadhead. But if we're talking about getting the pickup and delivery on time, we're all good there, no delays. So let's go ahead, lock in this load, and then now I'll see that Frank is hauling this load. And I can do this one by one, or I can go ahead and then take a wider view. So let me go ahead and clear this trip. So I'm looking at all the trips, still my 13 drivers. And I'm going to go ahead and then change my parameters. So instead of just considering one trip, I will consider, let's say, 3 trips out. And then I will select a handful of drivers, let's say Ellen, Frank, Jack Sparrow, and Jesse Pinkman. And then I'll optimize all 4 of these guys. I'm glad Load AI is trying to make all the drivers happy. And then here we go. So now I see that we planned all of these, the work for all of these drivers. And then what you see here in blue, or the dark blue, gray, that was already work that was planned or assigned. The green is what the optimization model is adding. So as you can, so this is a very powerful feature. And as you can imagine, it saves a lot of times for planners if they're okay with the assignment. So they can go plan by plan, tour by tour, and say, okay, what are the different stops? What is the aggregated KPIs from all of these? And say, let's say I like the first 2, and then I don't really like the Jack Sparrow. So why don't you go ahead and show me other options for Jack Sparrow? And then I would see all the various options here. So let's say I like this second route going to Staunton, Virginia. I'll go ahead and lock this, but I'll realize that I'll be messing up an assignment for Ellen. Ooh, you know what? I like Jack more than Ellen, so I'm going to go ahead and continue that. So Ellen's is done. Jesse Pinkman, I'm happy with, and I've planned these 3 drivers, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit save and exit. So I've now assigned 7 different loads across 3 different drivers, and basically mapped out their whole week. And then I'll come back for Ellen later.
Don't forget about Ellen.
Yes, never. And with that, I'll hand it over to you. And I think right now we have some time for audience Q&A. So if you guys want to add anything before the questions, feel free.
No, you know what? I know you referred to I've coined it the continuum. Maybe that's a product name we'll consider. But I love the Gantt chart because I used to be an operator. And again, everybody learns and has their own preference, whether it's spreadsheets, maps. And we have the maps because you got to have maps. But dots on a map don't always kind of tell the story. But when I think about pure execution, which is ultimately what I feel it matters, there's a lot of simulations being done. I think that's super cool. I think there's a lot of use cases. But if you're not able to really execute, and I think this UI has done a really good job of, I think some of your feedback from your users, then we really like that Gantt model because it never stops, because that's transportation planning never stops. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of just put a plug in there for the UI team. So yeah, I think we do have some. I think Emily may be kind of fielding some questions from the audience that are coming on the feed. So Emily, anything you want to read off for us?
Yes, we sure do have a couple that came through.
All right, we'll try to get them all.
Yes, and great insights, as always, guys. And yes, as Chris mentioned, at this point, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So if you haven't already, send me your questions. Please type those into the Q&A section in your console. And we'll go ahead and let's jump into it. So first question, there are always new software and technologies out there now. What are the best practices when it comes to end user adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably Scott, great question. I think that we touched on a little bit, right? And I think Scott could probably feel that better because I am the vendor. So I'll learn from, we want to learn from customers, I've said all along. So Scott, you tell me what we could do as a vendor. Maybe we're already doing it. Maybe there's things we could do more or better of.
Yeah, I think from an implementation standpoint, again, making sure you really understand the problem that you're trying to solve up front, and then coming up with true KPI deliverables that are realistic. I mean, everybody in a partnership with a vendor both people want to win, right? I mean, the vendor doesn't want to get fired and the customer wants to, even if they're not paying for it, let's say it's a pilot or something like that, they want to get the value out, right? Like we want this to change our business. So if you can come up with a set of manageable KPIs and say, these are realistic, we're both going to say this is what we're shooting for, I think just that exercise alone
Yeah.
is super valuable. And a lot of people, I think a lot of times vendors go in and they feel like, oh my gosh, we made a sale. And the company's like, wow, we found somebody who can really do something cool. And they don't necessarily break down like, okay, well, what does the next 6 weeks look like? What do we want to accomplish in 6 weeks? And make sure that that's a manageable goal. And then people get their feelings hurt and things get disappointed. And well, I thought you were going to deliver this. So I think the more you can try to clarify it up front, the better.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is you mentioned earlier is when the team came to the offices in Clinton there outside of Jackson is, as a vendor, we often get caught up in the sales cycle and the executive, high five and everybody's good. And then oftentimes in my experience, even as an operator, the marching orders come the next day that here's a new platform, you got to get your login credentials going. And then sometimes vendors will say, hey, well, you just call into this tutorial we're hosting for 30 minutes. I'm going, I never learned Excel in 30 minutes. I don't know how I'm going to learn a complete new platform in 30 minutes. So the idea, and I would suggest that all vendors, right, there is a cost to it, but it's well worth the T&E to go sit down and, develop a rapport with those folks. And again, they're humans first. So as a vendor, we want to establish that relationship, in and outside the office, get everybody comfortable with who we are, and then go shadow them, right? That's the point. It's this, tell me about your workflow. What do you like? What do you not like? What, if you had the magic wand today, what would you do differently? How do you envision technology being able to support that? And again, you may ask 10 different operators and get 10 different answers, but I would be willing to bet you can surface trends throughout that sampling. Yeah. And that's what vendors need to do is find out, you can't be over customizing for that, but you can certainly take that feedback in. And that voice of customer, like I said, wow, near and dear to my heart, because vendors that neglect to listen to their customers and try to, square peg round hole mentality and force fit it, never really works out too well. So great question. Hopefully that addressed your question very well. Emily.
Excellent. All right, moving on to the next one. What excites you most about the emergence of AI in logistics?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, we can both maybe feel that one. I'm a techie in a lot of ways, but I am a freight practitioner. So I've got to thankfully come up the ranks as an operator in commercial hats, many hats, and see that fusion take place and see the really that 1 + 1 = 3 equation we hear about. I really do think that's the secret sauce. But I think too much there's this polarization of companies that are stuck in their ways and they're not willing to really evolve. There's a lot of reasons for that. And there's some skepticism that's rightly so because tech hasn't always delivered on the promises, obviously. But I like that. That excites me to see that nothing makes me excited than seeing an end user saying my life just got much easier, or a driver that tells Scott, hey, I don't know what's changing over there at Gulf Relay, but I just had a really good conversation with someone asking about my weekend and my family. And the operator's happy because they finally alleviated a lot of the manual process throughout their day. Maybe, technology exposes things that may not have been, that the end user as a human just wouldn't be able to probably, be able to see the bigger picture. But again, I go back to I think it's that win-win situation that gets me most excited about AI. You may have something different to answer, Scott. I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I think it's all about letting humans be humans. That's the thing I'm most excited about AI. I think we have significant challenges in data cleanliness and workflow understanding and product building to get there. So I think actually, at the end of the day, I think AI is great, but I think you got to have a realistic approach to it.
Sure.
But the ultimate, we'll know we have won and done something really cool when the human side of it kind of shines through. I think more so than it's able to today.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, Emily. Hopefully that addressed that question.
I think it does.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to the next one. How do you see the current and future use of AI interacting with the push for autonomous vehicles? How are the cybersecurity issues being addressed?
Okay. I'll take the first part. I happen to be fortunate enough to kind of get in the Uber Freight circle when they were first coming to market in conjunction with Uber's Advanced Technologies Group at the time. And I swear, I mean, every conference I went to, we, and other folks that have maybe joining in that were at Uber, we really convoyed to when the digital freight thing came about in conjunction with the autonomous vehicle notion. I mean, I think everybody was either shaking in their boots, for better or worse, right? It was a lot of buzz around that. Here we are, right?
There are going to be no more drivers.
Yeah,
no more
drivers.
brokerages.
Yeah.
Still got brokerages, still got drivers.
It's done. Then reality set in. Here we are in 2023. And we still it's just more of kind of these one-off type scenarios, and there's a whole lot that goes into autonomous. But yeah, I think at some point, right, and I have no idea when this will happen, when the technology and the safety components and the public trust, the government's happy, then it does become more of a math problem. Mm-hmm. But I still, again, I look at just the sheer amount of volatility and variability that happens in the physical world, right? And autonomous vehicle manufacturers and folks in that space are really realizing it's super hard. So I think it's going to be some time before that, but I'm super excited. And again, at that point, we find a reason that maybe the driver is not as engaged as much, but I still probably don't I'm pulling up to a truck at a red light next to a sleeper cab. I'm hoping somebody's back there because I think there's going to be always a need for some level of human involvement in the loop. So yeah, that's kind of that. As far as the, I think the second question, Emily, was what, around the security?
Yeah, cybersecurity issues being addressed. Yep.
Yeah, that's a hot topic. I mean, again, I think you just have, as a vendor, I'm a firm believer there's always, there could be somebody anywhere in the world, a teenager that just wants to hack into any system. I think there's no, that you can do everything you can, but at the end of the day, there's always potential for some kind of security breach. So all we can do is just like every other vendor, whether you're the SOC compliance and other best practices to, try to mitigate that as much as possible. They're thankfully, I think, even in trucking, right? Who wants to hack a trucking company, right? As we are an indicator for economic activity, there's a lot of goods flowing out there that is valuable information to somebody. So we do need to protect that. I am not a cybersecurity expert, so I don't want to elaborate too much further, but as a general best practice, yeah, that is absolutely something important to us. I think you probably have to talk to the experts when it gets more technically how that best application for that. So I don't know if Scott, do you have anything else to add with that?
No, I'm not a cybersecurity expert either.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, we're going to be moving along then. As you are assigning and planning drivers on loads by leveraging the AI model, how does this assignment feed back to the customer TMS?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take that one.
Yeah,
I know I
commented.
commented.
You seem good.
Yeah, so I had commented on the TMS integration about data coming in. We fully understand that in order for this to be a real execution system that you use day to day, we can't have exports and manual entries. So there's definitely, we have data coming in that the model needs for the model to run, but we also have data going out in the form of pushing those assignments back into your record of truth, which is your TMS. Now, are any of these integrations live? I'm going to be honest with you. We're still in beta. We'll be launching the beta this week to our load ops customers. So right now, in the next week or two, we should be testing out that two-way integration with Gulf Relay. So I know the team has actively been working on that, but our intent very much is to push that data back, assuming the TMS side can accommodate.
Yeah, and I would only add, I mean, part of the question was about the, ROI, I think, based in certain time intervals. So I think there's, what we call low-hanging fruit, right? I think it goes back to what some of the conversation's been about, by empowering and enabling end users to do more with less. Some of that's soft savings, right? So when you talk about ROI, there's hard metrics that we can associate. And I think that needle moves in the right direction. Scott said it's an incremental process. And I think all too often, everyone's looking at a proof of concept study that, takes, so a year worth of data based on historical data that is, if we're looking at data from 2021 versus right now, I don't know that that's going to be the same exercise, right? So you do what you can to give a directional opportunity. And I think that, it equates into massive amounts. Say, I don't want to put a dollar amount, but it could be millions. But again, I'm a realist. So anytime I present savings and ROI, when you term about hard numbers, I think it's often say, hey, shave 10, 20, 30% off of whatever we came up with because it's a pilot. There's obviously things we don't know about that we will in due time. That'll probably bring that down. But again, I think it's also the incremental part, right? Scott said it. I'm going to say it again. If executives are looking to have that $40 million in savings in the first 6 months or a year of a deployment on any software, I think you're probably not being a little realistic there. So I'm a big believer in that. And then I think the second part of that, and I'll let you kind of chime in, Scott, is the implementation, right? All right, everybody's happy. We know that projects often live and die in the deployment, and implementation, and the integrations. We know in trucking it's hard because we have data accuracy problems. We have access to data. There's still companies in our industry, many that are working on tools like the AS400 legacy that I don't know how much support they're getting. We have EDI, right? Not exactly a cutting edge technology, but hey, it is become a gold standard. I'll use that in air quotes. But I think the proliferation of APIs, this idea is, I'm risk averse. It took us, years to implement EDI, and I'm afraid to rip and replace anything. How do we as trading partners with the TMS world, you mentioned the TMWs, the McLeods, the Masteries, and many others that are carrier-centric. I think we as the vendors on both sides of that equation have to work together to kind of educate our audience and the customers and the carriers on, explain this to them in terms that show that value can be added and how it can expedite the implementation process. You're still looking for an EDI, you're migrating to EDI or off EDI. I think that's going to be a burden. It's a clunky, it's slow process, it's costly. I'm hopeful that, and Scott can probably give me your 2 cents on when APIs, which I would say right now is still a relatively small percentage of the industry, is truly on APIs, and it's the big boys are leading the way typically on shipper and carrier side. But I think eventually it'll be a cost of doing business. So just like we don't send paper invoices and fax machines anymore, I think at some point we'll hit this inflection point where I know it happened with this continued consolidation we see in the industry, right? Where as smaller fish are getting a big fish, those tech stacks will then be deployed out further. And I think as APIs start to really show and generate the type of value and the speed implementation to the question, that's going to kind of really change the game, I think, in terms of just overall deployment strategies. So
yeah.
Anything else you would add, Scott?
You know, I think one of the areas that we're starting to just quantify the value here is just looking at how many loads we're taking that's not from a customer, right? So on the asset trucking side, we can look and see, you know, and we move a significant amount of freight with brokers still. Probably in a strong freight market, we're maybe moving 10%. In a weak freight market, we're probably moving 25% of our freight with brokers. Nothing against brokers, right? We have a brokerage on our side, but usually in an asset-based company, that represents a hole in the network, right? We all know that. And so if you just look at that and you say, okay, well, usually if I'm talking to a dispatcher in Chicago at C.H. Robinson, maybe Chris years ago, you know, and they're hearing that I have to get back to Clinton, Mississippi, it's like, oh, I got you, right? You're going to take a below DAT rate to move a truck back into Mississippi to reposition it.
Right.
You can pull those loads now and look at those and say, okay, well, even if Optym can get us to a DAT rate or above a DAT rate, what's that delta, right? And it's tens of thousands of dollars a month, you know what I mean? And rate goes straight to the bottom line in a trucking P&L, right? So if you're operating at 1 OR and you know you have a you know $70,000 bucket of savings, right, from a rate standpoint, that goes straight through. You know, you can almost count that. So we are starting to try to, in these early stages, quantify that. And so if you are a trucking company and you're looking at something like this, I'd encourage you to start small and say, what does that look like? And I do think it builds from there. But I also think that it's not just soft savings that there are real hard dollars there. You just have to kind of think about how would I quantify this from a P&L standpoint.
Well said. Yeah. Well said. Okay, Emily, hopefully that addressed that question. So it looks like there's still more coming in the feed.
Yeah, definitely. This one is kind of like a 3-part question. So bear with me. And if I need to repeat myself, y'all just let me know. All right, here we go. Is the model learning the network? Are assignments influenced by expectations of future loads? And how quickly does the model react to new data? Is it more effective for a load planner to fix data rather than override recommendations?
Okay, Shaman. I think I heard a lot of technical aspects. So yeah, I'll let you take a first crack at that one.
You got it. So is the model learning the network? I'm going to be honest, right now it isn't, but that is in our immediate roadmap. So we understand that it's very common that at the start of the week, maybe you only have visibility to 30%, 40% of the loads that you're going to be hauling that week, and the other ones will come in as the week unfolds. So we very much understand that as a need. And so there is going to be an aspect of the model in the near future where we will not only work off of available loads, but forecasted loads. So loads that we're predicting will appear just based off of historical data. But currently, that's not happening. And how quickly does the model react to new data? That's a configuration of how frequent we sync with the TMS. So our plan is to sync every few minutes or on demand as needed. Is it more effective for the load planner to fix data rather than override recommendations? Always, it's better to fix data. From whenever it comes to anything optimization related, we say garbage in, garbage out. But sometimes there's a time crunch and you just need to make a call. So in those cases, you can override the recommendation, hit save, and then go and fix the data after the fact, as often it tends to happen in the real world.
Got it. Yeah, that's a loaded question.
It is. Shaman, you did an excellent job answering that one. All right, looks like we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay.
All right, let's go with this one.
Who's the lucky winner?
What aspect of this AI as opposed to solving a constrained optimization problem?
I want to make sure I understood the question. What is the...
Yeah, the aspect of this AI as opposed to solving a constrained optimization problem.
Constrained optimization
So
problem.
the expectation maybe is the question that the expectation is that we're not showing the model, we're only showing the model loads that are currently available, rather than saying we're looking for loads outside of my own network. Is that, do you think that's what's being asked, Emily?
Yes, yeah.
Because I can take a crack at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll just set the context, Shaman, and I'll throw it to you briefly, right? So today, that's always the debate in trucking is sort of, okay, I have 400 loads I have to move today. This is the optimization for these set of loads. Well, but I could call my customers and I could go get more of this kind if I knew it, right? And so just as a CEO of a trucking company, I see it as two separate problems. The first problem you solve is a constraint problem, right? First problem is, what do I have today and how do I make that the best match for my drivers? After you do that for a period of time, though, and you start to build trends, you do, and that's why we go back to the broker data. You do need to mine your own data and say, okay, I get it, but where do I have, drivers landing every single week in these markets on Thursdays and Fridays, let's say Memphis market. And then after that, we know they're always coming down to Clinton for 3 hours. So I need short haul freight on Thursday afternoons and Friday mornings out of Memphis all the time. And you know what? I'm getting it all from C.H. Robinson. I should be getting it from some local customer there potentially, right? At an above rate. That's how I would sort of think about that piece. But Shaman, you can talk more to that from a tech standpoint.
Well, I know we're out of time right now, but oftentimes whenever people say AI, what they really mean is machine learning, which is a subset of AI. And optimization is yet another subset of AI. And we do plan on using machine learning models, as I mentioned, for the predictive aspect, which isn't there yet, but it is coming soon. So I would say, yes, you could bucket this as a constrained optimization problem as of yet, but the machine learning aspect of AI will be coming soon. That is it.
All right.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, that is all the time that we do have for today. A big thank you to everyone for taking the time to listen in. And another thank you to Shaman, Chris, and Scott for sharing your insights with us today. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be sent to everyone tomorrow via the email you used to register with. We hope you'll join us again for our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily.